In this very honest and open conversation, Nick Gillett from Mangrove Spirits shares his journey from what he described as a privileged upbringing to becoming a successful entrepreneur in the alcohol distribution industry. He discusses his early life, education, and the influences that shaped his career, with Nick emphasising the significance of understanding consumer behaviour and the value of saying no to opportunities that do not align with your vision. The discussion concludes with insights into his new role and the exciting challenges that lie ahead. I hope you enjoy. Morning, Nick. Thank you very much for joining us on the podcast.
Good morning, Steve. Good to see you. Good to be here.
Yeah. We won't mention the slight stress we've had technically getting here, but that makes us stronger, I think.
I'm in the alcohol distribution business, clearly not the IT business, I think I can say that.
Let's just leave it there. So obviously you were co-founder of a business called Mangrove, and there's lots of stories around that which we'll get onto, but it's always really nice to give our listeners a bit of background to understand how Nick has got here, and to give that history of your career and your key points, because what I always find is where people start and where people finish is not normally the same point. So it'd be good if you could share that to kick us off.
Sure. I see a lot of podcasts and I read a lot of interviews with founders of business who quite often are very driven by their childhood, trying to break out of a circle, change their circumstances. None of that applies to me. I came from what most people consider a fairly privileged background. My father was a partner for an accountancy firm in audit, worked incredibly hard and ridiculously long hours. And I went to a local primary school on the border of London and Essex. And when I was 9, academically, I was a star, or at least this is my memory now. And I changed schools to be pushed, and I moved schools. I mean, I'd like to just point in that I probably peaked academically when I was 9, but I moved
downhill.
I know, it's worrying when the whole life in front of you and you've already attained your maximum. But I moved to a private school, and so I think what I had growing up was a very stable family, and I had every opportunity, right, to try everything. So I can't say there was there was no hardship. So I went through an education. The school I went to, frankly, I moved to find that academically I was average. I played every sport because you had to. I was average. There was nothing stand out. I suspect nowhere in any yearbook or with my peer group would I be the one that you put forward to be successful in later life. It's popular. I had a decent set of friends, but I had a very supportive family and wider things. And I went through what to me was complete normality. So I did my GCSE or O levels and GCSEs. I did my A levels. I went to university because that's what everybody did, or the vast majority of people did. So none of that really was a conscious choice. I think the biggest thing I had to choose was what A levels I was going to do, and then trying to find something to do at university. I didn't really have an idea as I was growing up about where I was going to enter. I was given some advice as we went along, and I ended up going to Oxford Brookes Uni to do a hotel management degree, which is really business studies with a bit of a focus around hospitalities and hotels in particular. Not necessarily because I had a burning desire to be in that industry, but it seemed like something I'd probably enjoy and was worth doing. And it didn't narrow any options in my head. I think I probably thought, like a lot of my friends locally, I live in commuter distance from London. I'll probably just end up in the city doing something in financial services. That seemed to be where all the money was, and lots of people I knew did. I had what most people would say was every advantage, for sure, to find out. And I would say probably the biggest influence was I had a lot of willing people, both educators and externally, desperately trying to find a talent and nurture a talent that I may or may not be good at. I can give you a long list of things. Yeah, music and art will never be my skill set, and
Yeah.
I apologise to all those teachers who wasted hours and hours doing those things. But I tried everything, and I I was certainly one person who you gave me an opportunity, and I would go, yeah, I'll have a go, and I might not go back a second time or a third time, but I'd give it a go initially. Um, so yeah, I have one younger sister. We went to slightly different schools and different paths, but yeah, pretty normal, nothing standout background, to be perfectly honest.
I think it's interesting because sometimes people assume when someone has set up their own business that they've, like you say, they've got this sort of driving desire to prove somebody wrong or to prove the system wrong. And it, in my experience, yes, that obviously does exist, and there are some very famous cases of Mr. Branson and others out there. But a lot of it is, I think, it's interesting you talk about your attitude there, that you're up for trying things. And I think that element of an inquisitive mind and the fact you'd roll your sleeves up and have a go are probably some really good aspects of anybody's life and career that are worth how you get ahead, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think the early realization that when you participate, be it academic or in the sporting world, and you know, I went to a selective school yet to pass exams to get in. When you realise that there are people out there who are just simply better than you, there's no other way to put it, right? More intelligent on an academic level, on a particular metric. I don't think that defines you. And when you're playing cricket or you're playing football, you spot talent on the pitch. You know when you're not good enough, right? So even if I gave 100%, and I would give 100% a lot, um, you just know there's people better than you. That's an interesting. It's an interesting thing to remember. It doesn't make you any less important or anything else. And one of the things I've always done is play team sports, and I played adult team sports at a relatively early age as a youngster, probably from the age of 15, 14, 15, 16 going on. And one of the things I found then was mixing with a load of individuals who a whole variety of backgrounds. So, I mean, literally, you could pick anything. None of that mattered when they came together on the pitch, right? The 11 players mattered, and then the social part afterwards, in the bar and the stories and the jokes and all that thing. And one thing I found that um, actually it didn't really matter what people did in their background. Did I like them and playing sport with them, and was this the world I wanted to be? Was the most important decision making, and I found that a lot as I've gone forward. So I got a lot of exposure to a lot of different things, which probably broke me out of what could have been a relatively narrow environment. And certainly when I went to university, I met a lot of people from very, very different backgrounds and completely different things. I had a particular, well, I still have a very good friend who was the first person in his family to go to university. Um, and I mean extended family. And I've always looked at him as one of the bravest people I know, and his
Yeah.
achievements dwarf mine, because to break out of the expectation is incredibly hard. Um, but equally, it was exactly the same rule of thumb. I didn't really play. I've never cared about your look and what you want to do. It's a question of, do we get on? Are we
Yeah.
happy spending time together? Quite well, certainly when I was at university. Are we going to have a beer together? That was pretty much my
Well,
driving metric.
if you think about your career though, and you think about what work actually is, that is for me one of the key skills you need. Because if you can't connect with people, understand people, negotiate, influence, then you're a bit snookered in my view. I think you're a bit snookered to get anywhere, and especially to lead a business, because people are going to want to follow you.
one of the big realizations, and I think one of the successes in growing the business, I went through a stage when I was founding the business. You got to recruit. So when you're interviewing, you're asking a set of questions. You're resonating with people. You get a feel, right? Not just a tick box exercise of do people meet the minimum criteria, but then you're trying to build a culture within the business. And my first set of recruits were me, right? They were like they were all relatively privileged, sports orientated people who I wanted to have a beer with,
Yeah.
and we got on great, and we were incredibly successful. But the big realization was, right, we all think the same way, and
Yeah.
that's great, and that takes you so far. But actually, not all of our client base thinks the same way,
Yeah.
and we need some different input, and we need some different people. And uh, the best thing I did was recruit people out of my comfort zone. I've been on one of those courses somewhere, and they were talking about building a business, and you need a variety of skills. I had learned that. I knew I needed a variety of skills, but I also found I needed a variety of personalities and culture, partly to challenge me as I went along. Um, and actually, it's made the business journey a bit more enjoyable, if I'm being
Yeah.
perfectly honest, probably.
Maybe let's share a little bit because I think, yeah, having that awareness is interesting, isn't it? But I suppose for the last 20 years, you have been in what we would beautifully describe as the booze business, the alcohol business, haven't you?
100%. Yeah,
Yeah. So talk us
yeah.
through sort of places you've worked and how you think they've influenced where you are now with in terms of Mangrove and how that's going.
So Mangrove, I mean, as I say, I came out of university. I did a couple of other jobs because I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I've been offered some great jobs in hotels, but hotels are generally, certainly when you start, quite hard work for no money. Probably should have done my research before I did my degree. Um, and I did a couple of jobs. I worked for the Prince's Trust running leadership and training courses. I was based in central London. I had a great experience as a young guy. Um, Working with the unemployed, the employed, and the police and the military and everything else. Yeah, I was driving tanks. I was throwing people off bridges. It was great, and probably not a long term, probably not a long term career path for me, but a very enjoyable experience. And again, you pick up lessons all the way you go. But I set up some courses for them. I found myself teaching, and I found myself teaching in a further education college in London. Um, I was okay. I got some good results, but my heart wasn't in it. And again, I came up with some colleagues who, so you talk about driven and vocationally and the efforts they give. I wasn't at their level, and I didn't want to be average because of teaching
Yeah.
has so much. So I needed a career change, and I bumped into someone I'd played sport with, and this is the beauty of networking. And David was the sales director for a wine and spirit wholesaler whose market was London. And he said, "Oh, listen, I'd done some work for him in a previous business, holiday job." And he said, "Well, actually, I'm looking for somebody. Do you want to come and have a conversation?" I said, "Yeah, why not?" So I went and had a conversation. Money was terrible. It was less than I was on, and but the job was exciting, and it was portrayed to this: go and sell alcohol to all these nightclubs, bars, and restaurants in central London that you read about celebrities and royals being thrown out of. Very much a lifestyle choice, and possibly the wisest decision I've ever made to say yes. And
Yeah.
so, as somebody in their sort of early to mid 20s, I was literally walking bottles of alcohol into nightclubs, and
Brilliant.
because high perceived value but relatively low cost. Yeah, I'd be gifted a VIP table that they were selling for £5,000 or whatever it was, I'd take a load of my penniless mates and we would drink stock and we'd have to have a whip round to replace the bottle afterwards. But we were living a lifestyle,
Yeah,
age
you were there.
lifestyle.
You were watching them get kicked out.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
I thoroughly enjoyed it. But I started in sales from there. There's a couple of things that we'll come back to that were probably defining in that role. One day I walked in and I said, "Look, do you know what? We're great as a business, but we're terrible at people knowing who we are. Why don't we do any marketing?" And we didn't have anybody who did marketing. We didn't think it was particularly important.
Yeah.
So I became head of marketing. I mean, it was literally
They're careful what you wish for, isn't it? You've got a job now.
careful what we wish for. So we did okay. We put some things in place that very proud of that earned the business money. And then from there, I actually left that business. It was a business called Co-Vintners, and I left Co's to join a new brand launch. Again, we talk about luck and opportunity, but there was an opportunity in front of me. I was given it, made the best of it, and I launched a brand called SATT Team on behalf of an incredibly inspiring Brazilian who had invested a huge amount of money. The marketing agency was an agency called SATT.
You're in the big time.
And the things you learn, but also the things that I brought to the party that I didn't think they knew. And then from there, I went back to Coast, and this was an interesting thing. I had to go back to Coast because I was restructuring the UK business for SATT, and I spoke to John Coe, who's the owner, and I said, "Look, I think, John, you're going to lose every brand you've got because." I pointed out the flaws in his model, and he said, "Okay, great. What would you do about it?" And I said, "Well, actually, I got this idea. Mangrove was born, and I saw a gap in the market based on my experience. And full credit to John. I have no idea what he thought about me at the time. He probably just thought I was annoying and irritating, but he backed my idea with his funds. And so in 2006, Mangrove was kind of born within Co-Vintners. It was a new arm of an existing business, and then gradually it got spun off. In 2013, it got spun off to be on its own 2 feet with
Okay, so it was incubated, wasn't it, at first? Then within.
Yeah, it was incubated, which gave it a relatively safe area to learn and hone its skills and identity. John had recruited a managing director for Coast who was extremely good at what they did, but about a year older than me or the same age. So that path for career progression had
Suddenly
cut off.
the glass ceiling was in there. Yeah.
Yeah, and so my options really were, well, you go and work for somebody else, you stay where you are, or you commit to doing this and seeing how far it would get. And there was an element of risk in there. My wife was earning good money and working incredibly hard, so there was a bit of a safety net at home, and it just seemed too good an opportunity not to do. I had, if I'm being honest, I had no long-term plan and certainly no exit strategy. I just thought this seemed like a good thing to do, and let's see what it can become.
It's a really interesting point to pick up on that, because when people talk a lot about starting a business and the risks, etc., you had, by the sounds of it, mitigated a lot of, well, you can never mitigate everything, but the fact that your wife was earning well and that there was that, that's part of it. In your view, what was the worst case scenario if it did go wrong?
That is something that evolved. I was always extraordinarily confident. I'd done a decent job at sales, and I was relatively confident I could get a job. So, worst case scenario, I was going to be looking for a job, and that didn't worry me at the time. And I was being offered jobs, and and recruitment consultants will come and bang on your door. I've learned now on the other side of the fence that maybe when they come to you and say, "Oh, we've been asked to approach you, you're the number one target," is possibly not always the case. But at the time, I believed it. Right, I thought I was hot property, and so I thought I would just get another job if it all went wrong. That became a bit harder as the business grew, actually, because I got to a stage where I only got paid if we made money. Right, I wasn't taking anything out of the business. So then the downside of failure was really very personal and quite problematic. And could I afford X, Y, and Z?
Yeah.
And then as we grew further, the price of failure not only got amplified on a personal level, but suddenly involved other people who relied on our business being successful to pay their mortgage. And that's a very different philosophy that I don't think lots of people from outside understand. I think most business owners suddenly, when you have the weight of making payroll every month and keeping people employed who've shown a lot of faith in you, that changes the focus a bit. But I would underline that, you know, I was lucky. I worked, as I say, I launched a brand which was an incredibly successful brand launch with some great agencies, and we did some amazing stuff, and not everything worked, but I had an owner who had enough money and believed in what he was doing to try stuff. So we tried stuff. Some worked, and I never thought it would, and some stuff didn't work, but we tried it. And so it's a real rapid learning curve. Not everyone has the resources to do that.
Yeah.
And then when Mangrove was created, you know, John's a fabulously successful businessman who can, you know, I think we were a pet project. I think he thought, well, this will be this year's experiment. Let's see what happens. He wouldn't really lose a lot, but again, there's probably lots of people who've trod a similar path to me, but didn't have the backing of a partner who can get you through the tough times or could provide a bit of guidance. And that dynamic between John and myself, because listen, I was incredibly driven by the potential financial rewards, right?
Yeah.
And I was really very focused on what I could get out of it, not necessarily about the long-term idea about the business. Where John, not that fussed, right? Wasn't motivated by the money, but was motivated by building the best business possible. And that part between us actually, and much further down the line, became vital. It was absolutely crucial.
You merged and became a version of each other. So in a good way.
He's an older, very wealthy, successful guy who had quite a lot of experience. And I was very, very driven and trying to, make my way and earn lots of money. I mean, so, and either of those two dynamics left on their own can cause the collapse of the business.
Taking it the wrong way, yeah.
Yeah, and we had lots of animated conversations during our time, but always constructive and always with a rule, that ultimately he would listen to whatever I wanted to do, but he would have the last shout because it was primarily his finance.
Yeah. And so how much day to day was John involved? Is it John Coe, isn't it? He was your co-founder.
Yes, John Coe.
Yeah.
That's a really good question. I think if you ask him, he'll probably say absolutely every minute of every day. No, he was running another business for starters.
Do you mind me asking, was that in the same industry?
Yeah, so he still had co-vintners, the wholesale business at that point. So he was chairman of that. He had other businesses in drinks overseas and various other, and he's got other investments and a whole heap of interest. I think John was involved as much as he felt he needed to be. He certainly, monthly, weekly check-ins about numbers. The best thing about our dynamic was I don't think he micromanaged. But if I ever needed to pick up the phone, regardless of what he was doing, holiday, sporting activity,
Right.
wherever he was, he answered. And that
Right.
enabled me to get quick answers for things. It enabled us to be very, very agile. And so he was ever present without necessarily being physically
Yeah, without
accessible.
meddling, let's say, in a nice way.
Yeah. And
That's
he
quite
was
a
very,
skill, isn't it? That's quite a skill because he's, go
I
back to
realised, yeah,
how we started the conversation about building trust and you
yeah,
feeling your move. It's interesting your move to that school where you'd gone from being top of the class to suddenly, like you're saying, in the pack and thinking, oh my word, what have I done?
yeah,
You've got, I think it's interesting to hear you talk. Is you've obviously got like a silent drive inside you, if that makes sense. As in,
yeah,
you're not. I've met you a couple of times now. You're not full of yourself. You're not a show off. You're quite pragmatic about what you've achieved, which is quite impressive. But there's obviously this drive to say, no, I did belong. And then you've got that partner there that sounds like he was brilliant to bring actually the best out of you because he gave you enough, as they say, enough rope to hang yourself, but
yeah,
you didn't.
and was incredibly challenging as we went, right?
Yeah,
And yeah, I mean, it's interesting. As you say, we've met a couple of times. I'm sure if you ask other people around, they'll probably say he's arrogant, he's full of himself, or whatever. And I'm sure there's moments like that, right? And I think you have to have self belief, and um, there are times where I probably didn't necessarily have 100% either knowledge of the situation, and we went through plenty of situations where there was no rule book, COVID being probably the prime example. Um, and so, I have to learn on the job, and John had experience to draw on. He had a particular view. I had views. They didn't always overlap, but we were able to constructively argue about it. But he was a very generous man, right? He gifted me, the part of the business, which he didn't need to do. When we started, there was no plan for that. And he backed some ideas of mine, which frankly cost him money in time.
yeah,
We tried stuff. We didn't get everything right. And I realise now how hard it is to let people develop when you believe they're making the wrong decision.
yeah.
Um, and I probably didn't appreciate that as much as I should at the time.
That's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, because when you learn, like you've said a couple of times, you've got to get stuff wrong, and as long as you don't keep making the same mistake,
Yeah,
um,
it's interesting. There's a lot of analogies with sport, and we use one from Michael Jordan. And I'll paraphrase his quote, I'll butcher it, I'm not quite sure which, but he he had a stat where he was the player who'd missed the most baskets of all time.
yeah,
And he refers to the fact that if you never shoot, you can't get that
oh,
stat.
God. Yeah,
And that was one of the things that, if I don't have a monopoly on good ideas, and my experiences and journey have only given me one snapshot or one set of rules, one set of reference points. Other people have different things. And I know with hindsight, some decisions I've made have been the wrong ones. And other people may well have taken a different path or had a different view. And so some of the time, I know I don't think this is right, but they are pretty committed and they've made a very rational argument. And one of us will be right or wrong. It gives me no satisfaction 6 months down the road to be right necessarily. Right? I mean, I actually would much rather that I'm wrong in some cases. Um, and so part of running a business and creating an environment for people to flourish and for the business to do well is to allow people to try stuff and develop. And we John and I would try something every year. One thing, we'd have a project every year. Um, that we thought was worth our time, attention, and money. Because hey, that might be the big one.
Yeah.
Um,
Back to your
and
Michael Jordan. If you're not going to have a go at the
yeah,
shop,
you got to be in it, right? You got to be you got to be trying it because otherwise you never know. So and to do that, we had a pretty stable business behind. But yeah, that was that was our that was our thing. And we'll both look at each other when we meet up now. You know, we will laugh at some of the decisions that we made and go, yeah, that one's on me. Yeah, no, well, you got dear me, I don't know what you're thinking about because none of it killed us, right? None of it really cost us in the long run.
yeah. And I think as long as it's based on your experience and you're not just winging it and going, yeah, let's create a new drink that's never been done just 'cause we can. I think there's interesting, isn't there? There's a
It, it, yeah, I mean, it's funny you talk about creating a drink and you talk about breaking the mold. Um, so when I was in the wholesale business, we were presented, and I have to set the scene. Back then Bailey's was cutting edge. There was no cocktail scene. Um, the world of drinks and hospitality outside of a very rarefied atmosphere was pretty much, Gordon's on Optic. It was your standard beers, lots of which don't exist. We had none of these fake Italian, Spanish lager. We didn't have that world, right?
yeah.
And it's very difficult for a lot of people to remember that far back. When I was at
I
school,
can.
just to put it, yeah, well, when I was at school, to put it in perspective, computers came into schools, right? And I
Yeah.
was quite close to the end. I mean, so this is a whole new world. Um, but we were presented with a product by a marketing team, um, which was a cider called Magnus, right? And Magnus thing was quite sweet. I mean, I would say it was in the alco pop world, or
Yeah.
RTD world, or RTS world. And its secret was they poured it into a pint glass over ice that had never been seen before, and the bottle didn't all fit in the pint glass. So you had to serve the glass and the bottle to the consumer, which meant marketing genius. Everyone could see what they were drinking. And
Yeah.
anyway, they showed us this. We went up to Glasgow. We saw all of this in some rough pubs and box, and big hard men drinking what I thought was an unusual.
An alco pop, nearly.
Yeah. And we came back, and I went, well, that never worked. I think it went on to be the most impressive launch ever. And we sort of declined to get involved. And then in latter years, um, the guys from Fever Tree, founders from Fever Tree, came demonstrating. We were distributing it again as a wholesaler. And I absolutely got Fever Tree. I mean, their knowledge and their passion was amazing, and I understood the product. But I thought it'd be niche. And I'm there, and it wasn't a question of being asked to be involved or invested. It was nothing that grand. I just thought, yeah, that's interesting, and everything else they demonstrated. I thought they'd be successful, but yeah, not nowhere
They'll
near
never
the
become
level.
mainstream. Yeah.
It never become mainstream, and now I meet a lot of founders, entrepreneurs who've created products. I'm not a creative product person. I never have been. I've dabbled playing around with some brands. And so I'm always amazed when people come to me and say, here's our product, and maybe the market research isn't there, or the reason, or the USP. But I've learned to discount those at my peril for sure.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, stats are against them. But every now and then one of those things comes through, and you see someone who breaks the mold and doesn't do things the traditional way and is incredibly successful.
I think I'll just yeah, like you say, catches the market when it is hungry. Because my business partner worked on Krabbies and the launch of
Yeah,
Krabbies that was driven by them not having a cider in their portfolio at Halewood and
yeah,
thinking, what could we do? This over ice thing's a thing. Like to
yeah,
your point, it became a thing when they all did it then, didn't they? And it was all of that recording came out and all those. And we worked with them and developed, like, if you and I, when we were first having our beers at the sports club, went, you're going to drink an alcoholic ginger beer, you'd be like, a what? You know, if it was Krabbies or Stones, it was this awful bloody, sort of ginger wine, and you wouldn't touch it. And then suddenly there you are. Also found out it's one of the best hangover cures. But again, that's probably not a good advert for the podcast.
Well, I think it's quite interesting. I mean, listen, I played a lot of hockey is my game. I played a lot of hockey. I went on tour a lot, which involves a lot of camping in fields around Europe, basically, and enjoying yourself. And it was when Alco Pops were the big thing. Bacardi Breezes, Smirnoff Ice, Woodies, all of that sort of stuff. And I always describe it as my kind of guilty secret because although I'm in the world of premium spirits, I remember loving those things at the time, as did everybody else,
Yeah.
and they were a phenomenon. And there's a big thing in drinks, and you see it a lot, especially with the move towards luxury and some products. It's a luxury at every price point. It's not a necessity,
Yeah.
and I have a deep feeling that the world of drinks used to be a bit more fun than perhaps it is now,
Mm-hmm.
and it takes itself incredibly seriously now, and that's not what it's all about. It's to me, uh, I love the passion of creativity that comes from brand owners and hospitality operators, right? I mean, they're some of the bravest, hardworking people I've ever met, and I admire, in the same way you admire chefs. And I think people buy into the experience and want to feel, alcohol or non-alcohol or whatever. It's a facilitator for good times. There's a lot of stuff that's there, and some of the times, one of the products I have is Bounty Rum from St. Lucia. It's a national drink over there, and I spent a lot of time over there when I first got involved, working with the local team and trying to develop this drink serve that was ornate and stuff. And I said to these guys, I said, what's your perfect serve? And they went Bounty, ice, Coke, more Bounty, tunes, friends. I was like, yeah.
There we
And,
go.
and it's no more complicated than that. And I absolutely tell you, when the music's rocking and the sun's out, it's the best rum and Coke you're ever going to get, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes, we
can meddle
forget
too much, can't we? But it's
100%.
interesting that facilitator. So come on, let's get up to date. So
Yeah,
you
go on.
obviously ran Mangrove from 2013 with obviously Nick
Yep,
as your co-founder in there, and it grew a lot. And
yep.
then was it Feb last year, or was it two? Gosh, when
2023.
2023
Yeah,
when you
we're
sold
2 years in.
to the beautifully named GB8
Yeah,
Martinique. So talk us a bit
yeah,
about what happened there. What was the reason for the sale? What has that opportunities
sure.
given? How have things changed? I think everybody always wants to know what it's like after an
Yeah.
investment or acquisition.
So, there's a bit of history and there's probably trigger points to the ultimate decision. So, 2016, John sold Codinus to another trade buyer. I think he decided that he didn't. He just didn't. I don't think he enjoyed it as much anymore. If I'm being honest. So it was probably at its most successful. And I look back then, and the team that were running that business, and the business kept growing exponentially. But the team running that business, who are now littered throughout the industry, it was an amazing team. And they are some of the finest people I've ever worked with, and I see there, and they're all doing a lot of success. But John sold that business, which suddenly left Mangrove very much on its own. And we were doing. It was kind of we were the chosen distributor for Brown Forman, the owner of Jack Daniels. They bought some tequilas in 2013. We were doing those in 2016. They spent a lot of money buying some whiskey distilleries, but they had a joint distribution arrangement with Bacardi in the UK. So the whiskies came our way. So life is good, business is booming. 2016, John suddenly got more time and money on his hands than perhaps he's had for a while. We're there, we're expanding, we're more ambitious than we want to be, and we're having a good time. We're enjoying ourselves. 2020 for a lot of people will only be known for the pandemic, but just before that, about 18 months before that, Brown-Forman informed us that they were setting up their own distribution and taking their products back. To be fair to them and to be fair to the team that were there, we'd had a great time working together. We'd been really successful. They gave us as much notice as they could. They were very dignified about it, but it was 30% of our turnover.
Yeah.
So I'm already going into a pandemic, unknowingly going into a pandemic, I should hasten to add, with 30% of my business disappearing on a particular day. So we plug those gaps. Not easy to do when you've been growing brands, and it's not easy to do when you lose brands. One of the challenges about a distributor, and something I wish I thought of when I set the business up, is if you don't perform for your brand partner, you get fired. They take the brand away.
Yeah.
If you do a bloody great job for a brand owner, he sells it. They take the brand away. I mean, I'm on a hiding to nothing, right? So we talk about being custodians of a brand. Anyway, so we lost that. We'd redone it, but we were going to have a dip. Pandemic hits. Everybody's got a dip. And we went through the pandemic, and this is where I think the mental change that people don't understand. So in the first weeks of the pandemic, in rough numbers, we owed 4 million quid, right, to our suppliers, and we were owed 5 million back. So, in my head, there's £1 million floating around that, whatever.
Yeah.
But no one paid us. Small, medium, large, no one paid us. 80% of our business was in the on-trade, and it just shut down. The big supermarkets didn't. It wasn't that nobody wanted to pay us. Like, no one went to work. There was nobody working in a finance team anywhere in the world that could do anything.
To actually do the transaction, yeah.
And I thought, that's it. Everything I've got in this business, we're done. I was all doom and despair. I was learning about loans. I was learning about bankruptcy, everything that went on. And I employed, 20 odd people at the time, right? So furlough came along. We took advantage of that for the majority. We just employed some people. And John and I had a long conversation, and we decided that, and we didn't think that the pandemic was going to last as long, but we decided we wanted to do the right thing. So people we'd made job offers to, we honoured. They didn't qualify for furlough, so we had to pay them. We'd had 2 people leave us, but not join their new employer, so they weren't eligible for furlough. So we employed them. And then we did something which it was the right moral thing to do, and I did it because I believed that we would get paid eventually. But we paid all of our suppliers. So we went out and we paid everybody, regardless of the fact we weren't getting paid ourselves, and we paid the smallest first. And we then went to the people that owed us money, and we pushed the big guys, right? Undoubtedly, we were saying to Tesco's and Waitrose and stuff, we need your money. But the smallest wholesalers who we'd known for a long time, I was phoning them up and I was saying, listen, can you pay me? They're like, no, we haven't been paid by any of our buyers. I was like, pay me when you can. I won't phone you again. I'm always here if I can help, but I won't phone you again. And that was unusual. No one else was doing it. Everyone else was on the phone banging the table. And I didn't do it because, frankly, I couldn't see a way that people could do it. They didn't need that. Bizarrely, in January, then we got a COVID loan. COVID loan was going to see us through. Never the great deal that it was ever done, but that's a separate issue. But it saved us at the time, and we use that to pay everybody, right? So then in July they opened up hospitality, and in the first week of July, no one's got any stock because everyone's sold it out of the car park, everything. They've liquidated everything they got. So July is suddenly massive, and of course everyone's paid us in almost within a week. All of our outstanding debt came in. Other than some of the biggest guys in the industry, which to this day is still disappointing, right? I think as an industry we should be, and I still believe this, you've got to look after the small people to have a healthy industry. But all of a sudden we're awash with money. I am now like, wow, we're going to be all right. And sales are good through supermarkets and online and everything else. And of course, my wage bill's offset. So actually, we came out in 2020 in pretty good shape. And halfway through the year, I'm like, we're going to survive this. Not only that, we're going to be in good shape. We're going to be better than other people. John, however, who wasn't running the business day to day and wasn't quite as close and wasn't talking to the bank on what felt like an hourly basis and talking to our customers and everything else. And so didn't have quite the connectivity with I guess, the momentum was trying. He suddenly realised, and we had no bank borrowings, he financed the whole thing himself. So he's suddenly got a lot of exposure. So we come out of the pandemic, it's been a decent year, but I think somewhere in there, his appetite, his risk appetite probably got a sense check, right?
Yeah.
And I was going to lose everything that I'd left in the business, and I had to go and get another job and do whatever, and I was willing to do that. But he had a lot of money in there, and we came out of that COVID thing a changed business, certainly mentally between us as owners. And then everyone circles. They're looking for blood in the water. So we had a nice business, and all of a sudden we've got probably a dozen companies trying to buy us. They're all looking for a distressed sale. Weirdly, we weren't distressed at all.
Yeah.
So people were approaching us saying, "Oh, pennies in the pound," and we're like, "We don't want to sell." And John and I didn't want to sell, but we listened to offers that were going on. We had a couple of very interesting offers come on the table, and we were a long way down with somebody who was trying to do something new in the market, which was quite exciting. The role they had for me seemed like transformational. It's nice when someone massages your ego.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're suddenly asking me to run a business which is probably 10, 20 times the size of the business I've been running. I'm asked a question, can you do it? And I'm like, oh yeah, I can do this. Staying in my head, there's like, and the money being offered is amazing, right? And I was swayed. Absolutely, I bought in. I love the guys pitching the idea to me. Of course, a lot of the money was stage payments based on success, and I don't think there's a bar opening up on the moon anytime soon. And with hindsight and looking at the deal now in the cold light of day, most of those things were never going to be achieved. But I was seduced.
Yeah.
So I said to John, look, it's a really good offer. Here's a chance for you to get out. This is good for you. And he said, yeah, all right, we'll go through that. Anyway, that deal collapses. Another one comes along, similar. And I said, well, this is ridiculous. We're not going to do it. And he just said to me one thing. He said, look, actually, if that money's on the table, we'll do whatever you want to do. There was no pressure. But yeah, maybe I'll go do something else. And my heart sank, I think, when I heard that. Because although John would have been good to his word and saying that there was nothing that needed to happen in a hurry, it means we're not going to go and take another project on. Our ambition is limited, and everything's going to be a bit harder. And now I'm in partnership with someone who I might just have the odd second thought. I'm not going to say not committed because that's unfair, but just had changed. And anyway, so this deal's now become important. Anyway, it collapses. And now I'm so fed up. And then I've been chatting to Group Bernard Hire at GBH, right? And we've been selling them a brand, French company, family-owned business, been going since the 60s, based in Martinique. And I hadn't read them correctly. I didn't realise they were interested in Mangrove. And then they said to me, is Mangrove for sale? And I said, well, it's funny you say that. Yeah. But I mean, I think we're about to be sold. But here's the name of our M&A guy. He's got a period of exclusivity. He'll give you everything. And our M&A guys and our legal team were superb. They opened up the data room. GBH moved at a speed that was incredible. And as one deal collapsed, and I'd already decided that actually I preferred this new group of people because I'm going to have to work for a long time, so that had to be right. The owners came in to see me on a Sunday. I was really taken with their approach, and they said some interesting things. We love what you do. We are incredibly impressed with what you've achieved. We just want you to carry on running it. and we want to put our brands in there, and we're going to leave you alone. And immediately I'm like, well, that sounds like bullshit, right? Because
Yeah.
no one spends money and
I've
then
seen that
just,
film before, yeah.
yeah. But and they said to me, but we have one question. I said, well, what's the question? And they said, you run your own business, which you've created. Will you be happy working for us? And I was taken by that question. And I thought, well, you kind of understand my sort part of the dynamics going around in my head. Am I employable? Can I fit into an organisation? All the self-doubt that comes in. And I said, oh, if I say yes, then let me tell you, I'm 100% committed. And so we ironed out some of the things. The more I got to speak with them, the more I could see the opportunity. And it was the best move I ever made at the time. It's opened up a whole range of other challenges, but I sat there in 2023. Then we just sold the business to them. I sat in Martinique. It's never the worst place for a meeting.
I was going to say, was that part of your decision-making process?
Well, they
Oh,
have
not another
distilleries in
board meeting
Martinique
in
and St.
Martinique.
Lucia, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I didn't listen beyond that, to be honest. But they said to me, they said, look, there's just one thing. I thought, here we go. This is my penance, right? And I had a fixed term contract, so I've got to do a period of time. So I'm a bit, well, if it doesn't really work out, then it's so be it. It's a life lesson. And they went, what do you need? I said, what do you need? I said, well, what do you want the business to be and what do you need? And that wasn't a question I was expecting. So I outlined some stuff, not particularly outlandish. Right, go ahead, do it. And that's been my very positive experience so far.
Amazing.
They're pushing us, and it's the most challenging I've ever had, because in the past, I could kid myself at night that I was going, if only I had 20 people, I could achieve this. Or if only I had one of these computer systems, I could do X, Y, and Z. And now I go, if I only had 20 people, they're going to go and get it. You're like, oh, right.
Yeah.
Ah,
Yeah.
oh. Yeah. So that's an interesting one, because I'm running out of excuses as to why we don't do things and why we're not.
Yeah.
Because they are, and it's not a frivolous thing, there's a
Yeah, there's
process
got to
you've
be
got
a
to go
business
through.
case, but
But it's a very interesting process. And from talking to lots of entrepreneurs who've sold out their businesses, almost unique in experience.
I
This
think
is one
I
that
was about to say
certainly
that. I think
hopefully
that
lasts for a long time.
yeah, it's really interesting because I've been lucky enough to meet a lot of founders and both people who've built the business and then both people who have come in to do the second stage of growth with it. Because sometimes the founders' skills aren't good for running a successful business, and that is such a big question because we all think, yeah, we'll be fine. But
Yeah.
you haven't had a boss for 10, 15, maybe even more years, and it's a thing, as they say. So I suppose it gave you a wonderful insight into they were aware of who they were and what was going on, which is very impressive.
And listen, they own 300 businesses around the world. They run each one independently. They're an old-fashioned conglomerate. Doesn't exist anymore. And
Yeah,
I'm very taken. The father, his sons run the business now, but the father, who's the founder, who I've met on several occasions and watched him give a speech very early on the back of a very successful year. And he's talking to 250 middle managers from the Caribbean. And he says, look, it's tough out there. We're in a region of the world. We are very successful. We employ 20,000 people around the world. We have to stay humble, right? We have to realize that, this is on the back of hard work and dedication and everything. And I was like, wow, this is different from some of the other businesses I've been involved with and some
yeah,
of the other cultures I've been in. And and I was very proud of what I'd achieved and everything else. And then, I find that the gift shop in Martinique, one of our distilleries, has roughly the same turnover as I do. And I was like, wow, I'm joining something of a different world, right? And and we talk about trust, and we talk about where can I work for someone. And one of the things is they were very good at explaining to me the value that I could bring to the business, because I didn't want to be an ornament sat around. I wanted to bring something. and we are evolving the business globally across America and France, and I'm involved in a bit of advisory from that, trying to help those businesses evolve into what Mangrove is, because my experience is all about working with third party brands. Theirs is only working with their own brands. There's a different mindset and things. And they're seriously ambitious, so they want to expand, and they're acquisitive, and there's a really great mergers and acquisitions team. And I'm lucky enough to be involved in a lot of those conversations and business service, which is a new skill set and very interesting for me, and something that without selling a business would never ever in a million years have come along. I don't walk around the world looking to try and buy distilleries and
Yeah,
companies. We wouldn't have done that. So it's a new challenge. It's a fun experience so far.
that's amazing. I've just realised the time. We're pretty much out
Yeah.
of time,
So
and I've literally not got onto any of the questions I had. But I think you've been so honest and open. It's a fascinating, because these things can go many ways in terms of a conversation. But I think it's wonderful to give people an open and honest view of how careers evolve, and everyone is different and everyone is unique. And it's about how you take those opportunities, how you assess them, but then also, without the decision you made a couple of years ago, you've got this whole new lease of life in a new organization that you didn't probably think existed nowadays. And I didn't, hearing that and that openness, but also on that scale, you hear of that sort of like culture being in a smaller, 100, 200 people business, but to have that in a 20,000 strong workforce is a skill and a half. That's very impressive.
and they operate in scenarios. They've recently been hurricane affected and everything else. And it sounds stupid, and maybe people will not believe it, but profit for them is a secondary function of being good business people and looking after your people.
Yeah.
And their first reaction is, are we doing things the right way, in the way we want to be portrayed? And that's very refreshing. It's quite challenging. Are we doing the same thing? Do we have the company culture? I never set out to sell out. I never dreamed of that someone would like enough to pay money for what I had created. And one of the things that is quite funny is people ask me a lot about the decision making process that we went through to get to this fact. A lot of the time there wasn't one, right? We went because it felt right. Some informed data decisions, but we're trying to compete against the truly big guys in the world, and we have to do things differently. We can't just repeat what they do because they got more money, more people, better brands, whatever. So we've always had to be a little bit different, and with that comes good and bad. And I've been lucky with the people that I've worked with and the experiences I've had. And one of the things I would say to everybody, probably what got us to this stage more than anything else, was our willingness to try stuff and appreciate it might not go right. None of our mistakes, none of our experiences, none of our sort of investments would ever kill us outright.
Yeah.
They might hurt, but they wouldn't kill us. And so, they're if you like,
Either
gambles.
commercially or physically.
Yeah, yeah. Although it comes close a couple of times, and I've been fortunate to get good guidance, and every day I'm like a sponge trying to learn from every experience. Good and bad, and the world is changing quite quickly. So I'm going to upskill myself, certainly with a different generation. And I think backing yourself is great, up to a point. Taking advice from people who are more experienced, but also one of the things that I've always done or tried to do. I don't claim to be an expert at anything, but I do try to understand enough finance, enough marketing, enough whatever to have an informed opinion. But then I try and leave it to the experts after that, right? So there's no point in employing an FD, for example, and doing all the numbers. So,
Yeah.
we have all of that, and I was once asked. In fact, I was asked it relatively recently by an aspiring brand owner, who's trying to do various things. And the easiest thing in business is to say yes, right? Very easy. When you run your own business, say yes to absolutely everything. But it's what you say no to that defines your business, both in terms of culture, opportunity, and routes. And believe me, on some of the examples I've given, there's many of those I've said no to, and then regretted in later life. But I was able to shape something that reflected what I wanted it to be.
Brilliant.
And so that's the one thing it's the one thing John always used to say. It's what we say no to that will define our business. And I think that's pretty strong advice.
I think that is a wonderful, wonderful place to leave the conversation. But I've just been making a few notes as we've spoken, and we've not got on to a lot about the new business. So I'm assuming a second recording in Martinique is on the cards, maybe later this year.
Absolutely. It's probably the best way to do it. There's a big thing about understanding your product.
Oh, I mean, I've got to research it properly, haven't I? Yeah.
I'm very impressed with your dedication.
There you go. Commitment to the end. Nick, loved it.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. I really enjoyed meeting you.
Oh, thanks, Steve. It's been great. It's very enjoyable, and I hope it's interesting to somebody, or maybe it helps somebody else.